So for today's video, I'm going to be telling you guys my birth story, and I know this is going to be a long video. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to just get right into it. So if you'd like to hear my birth story, then just keep on watching. Okay, so everything started on Wednesday, August 25th. I remember that date specifically. I had my regular 36-week checkup because at this point in your pregnancy, you're going to your doctor appointments every week. And my mom had come down to stay with us for a few days because I was no longer working. I stopped working about a month before my due date. Will was still working and I was still running errands and trying to get things ready for the baby. So my mom came down to stay with us for a few days just so I wouldn't be alone since it was very close to my due date. So she takes me to my doctor's appointment, and my doctor's office has its own parking lot, but the parking is really expensive. And typically those doctor's appointments are really short, the max maybe like 15 minutes. So I was like, Mom, just, stay outside, just double park outside. It's gonna be a quick appointment. I go into the doctor's office, there's no wait. I go right in, I text my mom, I'm like, okay, perfect, there's no wait, I'll be right out. And the first thing that you typically do in these appointments is you see the nurse, and the nurse checks your vitals. So she checks your temperature, your weight, your blood pressure, and then she asks you about like COVID questions. So she's checking my blood pressure and she's like, oh, do you have a blood pressure monitor at home? Your blood pressure was a little bit high today. And I was like, no. So right there, I kind of got a little worried because they've never like mentioned that to me in any of my appointments. And I don't know what made me remember the term preeclampsia. I had heard the word before. I didn't know exactly what it meant. I know this is gonna sound silly, but I knew that Kim Kardashian had preeclampsia. And something just told me to look it up. And sure enough, when I typed in preeclampsia, high blood pressure came up. So the doctor comes in and she's like, okay, so how are you feeling? Anything out of the ordinary? And I'm like, nope, everything's great. Everything's normal, because I felt fine. Like nothing felt any different. Nothing felt off. Like it was just a normal day of being 9 months pregnant. The doctor is like, I know it's annoying to have to come to these appointments every week when you're so far along in your pregnancy, but we have to check for preeclampsia because towards the end of pregnancy is when a lot of women develop preeclampsia, and also it's a lot higher in Black and Hispanic women, which that is exactly what I am. I'm Black and Hispanic. And I was like, oh, because the nurse just mentioned something about I should have a blood pressure monitor. She said my blood pressure was a little bit high, and I guess the doctor hadn't even looked at my vitals yet. So she went out, she talked to the nurse, and she came back. And she was like, yeah, your blood pressure is actually really high. You're gonna have to go to labor and delivery right now. And I was like, okay. So she says that at labor and delivery, they're gonna have to test me for preeclampsia. And at that point, I was 36 weeks and a couple of days, maybe like 4 days. If it is preeclampsia, then we will have to admit you into the hospital, and we would have to induce you on Sunday, because on Sunday was the day that I hit 37 weeks. And at 37 weeks, you're considered a full-term pregnancy. Anything before that, it would be a preterm pregnancy, and it would be considered a preemie baby. So then she continues on with the appointment, and obviously like I couldn't focus, I was freaking out. Like, out of everything she said to me, like all that was registering in my head was being induced on Sunday. I text my mom and I was like, okay, just kidding. Like, it's not gonna be a short appointment. We have to go to labor and delivery. My blood pressure is really high. I'm trying to like text everything and explain it to Will, which in reality, like I didn't even fully understand what was going on. So I'm like sitting here trying to explain it to them. So we leave the appointment, we go to labor and delivery, we go to the triage, which I had heard of the triage. I didn't know exactly what it was. So if you're pregnant or if you're about to have a baby, I'll kind of explain it. So the triage is basically where you go in the hospital. It's kind of like the step before getting into your delivery room. I'm guessing you go there if you're having like any complications, which obviously I was having complications, and it's like a big open space. It's not private rooms, or at least in my hospital, it wasn't a private room. A bunch of like little sections that are divided by curtains. Me and my mom mom got to the triage and there was no wait. There was literally nobody there. I think I was the only person there. And they gave me a hospital gown, which I don't know why I was so excited to be in a hospital gown. I'm gonna insert a lot of pictures throughout the video. I didn't take much like footage. Like the last thing I was thinking about was recording for YouTube, but I did take a lot of pictures. So I'm gonna insert some pictures. First thing that I had to do, or the first step for testing for preeclampsia, is you have to take urine. And then basically they just put the blood pressure cuff on your arm. You lay down in the bed, they turn off the lights. They want you to be as calm as possible, as relaxed as possible. And you basically just lay there for hours. The cuff is on your arm and the cuff goes on and off, pretty much like every 20 minutes. Every time the cuff would go off, because you know the cuff like gets full of air and it gets really tight on your arm, I would tell my mom like, oh, go look, like what does it say that my blood pressure is? So when I first was at the doctor's office for the appointment, my blood pressure was, I think, like 145-ish. At the triage, it kind of was just going up and down. It was like 135, 145, 150, like it was just fluctuating. I was there for about 4 hours, which I had no idea how long was this gonna take. So at the end, it's like pretty much a long piece of paper that printed out, and it's like all my blood pressures from the 4 hours, like in a chart, and it just shows it going up and down and up and down. And by the time I was leaving, it was around 6 o'clock, and my blood pressure was back down to kind of normal. It was like 125. But by the end of the 4 hours, they said I didn't rule in for preeclampsia, that my urine didn't have protein in it. And since my blood pressure kind of went down, that I didn't rule in for preeclampsia. I was like, oh, okay, I'm okay. I don't have preeclampsia. I'm not getting induced. Fine. Doctor prescribes me with a blood pressure monitor. He says, you know, go get a blood pressure monitor, check your blood pressure 3 times a day, and I forgot what the number was. He said, I think if my blood pressure goes over 140 again, then to come back into the triage. We went home. I got my blood pressure monitor the next day, and he told me to check it 3 times a day, and I literally checked it probably like 20 times a day. And it was the same thing. The blood pressure just kept going up and down. And I was like, okay, like I'll just wait for tomorrow. And if it's high again tomorrow, then I'll call my doctor and I'll see what she says. Now it's Friday morning. My blood pressure is still high. It's still in the 140s. So I call the doctor and I tell her my blood pressures from Thursday and Friday morning, and she's like, yeah, that's still really high. You have to go back into labor and delivery. So between Thursday and Friday, I kind of had it set in my mind like, okay, like I might get induced on Sunday. The baby might be here by this weekend. So I'm like getting things ready. I had already packed my hospital bag, but I was just adding like last minute things. I was just trying to make sure that everything was ready for Sunday if I had to be induced on Sunday. So we go back into labor and delivery on Friday, and this time there was a wait. And there was a girl waiting in the waiting room. She looked just as far along as I did, and she was talking on the phone in Spanish, and she was saying to someone like, oh my God, like I've been waiting here for 2 hours. This is ridiculous. And I was like, oh my God, like this is gonna be a long day. Like she's been waiting for mad long. Me and my mom are sitting there waiting for like 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes they call my name, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like they're calling me before this girl that has been waiting way before me, which made me just kind of think like, damn, like my situation must be like really bad if they're calling me in before her. So they call me in, I do the exact same thing. I put on a gown, I give them a urine sample. Something I forgot to mention is, which they did on that Wednesday and on Friday, is they put an IV on my hand, which was so freaking painful. Mind you, I went through labor and pushing my baby out, but putting an IV in your hand is so painful. Like that's one thing I specifically remember about this whole process, was putting the IV in the hand. And they were like, basically we have to do this just in case anything happens, if there's an emergency and we have to give you IV right away. We don't want to worry about having to put an IV in your hand. So we put it on like as soon as you get here. So we're doing the same thing. In my mind, I'm like, okay, if I didn't have preeclampsia on Wednesday, there's no way I have it 2 days later. So I'm thinking, okay, it's gonna be fine. Like, I'll probably have to be induced on Sunday. Like, I'm just trying to like relax. So after 4 hours of checking my blood pressure again, the doctor comes in and she's like, okay, so your blood pressure at this point is dangerously high. It was like 160. And she was like, I know that the doctors told you that we would have to induce you on Sunday because that's when you hit 37 weeks. But because your blood pressure is so high, we can't even wait until Sunday. Like, honestly, waiting 2 more days is not gonna make much of a difference for the baby. So we're gonna have to induce you tonight. And I automatically started bawling. I just started crying because I had my mind set on being induced on Sunday. I was not prepared to be induced right there. And this is like the only part that felt like a movie. Like, a bunch of nurses came in, they hooked me up to a bunch of things, they put like different IVs on me, they like bumped my bed up and like rolled me into a delivery room. They're like, okay, where are we taking her? Where are we? Like, that part was crazy and scary. Mind you, Will is still at work. Since we had that false alarm on Wednesday, I was like, you know, just don't worry about it, go to work, like don't get anxious, like don't get nervous. So I texted him. I remember specifically it was exactly 6 o'clock when they told me I had to be induced, and he got out of work at 6 o'clock. And I texted him maybe at like 5:50, and I was like, you need to leave right now. They are inducing me tonight. So me and my mom get to the labor and delivery room. Will leaves work, he's rushing over, and you know, they're going over things with me. You know, they're telling me basically the cure to preeclampsia is basically just to get the baby out of your body. Basically, the pregnancy and the baby is what's causing the high blood pressure at this point. So we just got to get her out. And also it was really scary too, because high blood pressure could be fatal for the mother and the baby. Like, it could cause your organs to shut down. So that's why they had to move like really fast, and that's why they couldn't wait 2 more days until Sunday to induce me. So Will finally gets to the delivery room, and I got induced. Again, I can't like remember certain things after a point, but I got induced Friday night. I didn't know exactly what being induced means. Like, I know it basically means like starting labor and starting contractions and like making the process quicker. But I thought being induced was like they give you a shot, or it was like a pill, or they like inject something like through your IV. So the way that the doctor described it is basically they insert like a balloon into your cervix, and the balloon like expands, and once it pops, that's when your water breaks, and then at that point you'll be around like 5 centimeters dilated. It's called like a Foley or something like that. We just refer to it as a balloon. They're putting a balloon inside of me. So she puts the balloon inside of me, and I was already 1 centimeter dilated at that point on my own. That was before even starting the induction. So after they induced me, it was pretty much a waiting game. I don't remember who was a doctor, another nurse had come in, and they were like, oh, do you want epidural? And I was like, yes. At that point, I really wasn't in any pain, so I felt like I didn't need the epidural right then and there, but I for sure wanted it at some point. And they were like, all right, well, the anesthesiologist is available right now to give you the epidural if you wanted it. Let's say if in another hour or 2 hours, when your contractions start getting stronger and you want the epidural, we can't guarantee that the anesthesiologist is going to be available to give it to you. So it's kind of up to you. So I wouldn't say they necessarily pressured me to get it. I just was scared that if I went a few more hours and I started getting into real pain with really bad contractions, that the anesthesiologist would not be available and I wouldn't be able to get the epidural for a long time. So I was like, okay, like, I guess I'll just take it now. And I was like, is it gonna wear off? Like, I've heard so many horror stories of people saying that they got epidural and then it wore off and then they felt everything by the time, you know, it was time for them to push. And they were like, no, like it doesn't wear off. If anything, we just like refill your epidural IV bag and that's it. So the anesthesiologist comes in. So my mom and Will had to leave the room because when they give you the epidural, it can only be you, the anesthesiologist, and the nurse in the room. Basically, like I'm sitting here, the anesthesiologist is behind me, and then the nurse is in front of me pretty much for like support. I was literally like holding onto her arms. And they put this like big sticker on your back to pretty much map out where the shot is supposed to go. So he gives me the epidural. So I'm holding on to the nurse, they finish, I lay down, and I was like I had to throw up. Like I was motioning to the nurse that I had to throw up. I guess the epidural just had that effect on me. So I throw up after the epidural. My mom and Will come back in the room, and after that it was pretty much just a waiting game. The doctor would come in every couple hours to see how dilated I am, to see if the Foley balloon had expanded and popped, and that shit was not moving. So the doctor's like, okay, like I'm just gonna pop it. So she pops the balloon, she breaks my water, I feel just like a gush coming out, and at that point I was like 5 centimeters dilated. And I was stuck at 5 centimeters dilated for like more than 12 hours. So at this point, contractions are getting stronger. I'm not starting to feel it because obviously I have the epidural, but I'm starting to feel the pressure. And one thing about epidural that I did not know, I thought epidural, they just inject it to you and it's just like a constant thing. I didn't know, or I don't know if all hospitals do it the same, but basically the epidural was like a button. Like basically they gave me this like handheld thing and they were like, press it whenever you're starting to feel pain or pressure. And at first I didn't press it because I don't know, I just forgot about it. I didn't realize that that's how it worked. Like they told me, but I don't know, I was just like completely out of it. So I wasn't pressing it for the longest. And then I was like, oh, like I'm feeling the contractions. And they're like, oh, well, did you press the epidural button? I was like, no. They're like, okay, well, you need to press it. So whenever you're feeling the pain, you press the button. It's like a little green light on it. You press the button and it kind of like injects the epidural into you at that point. And it starts to ease the pain and the contractions. And on the little button, there's like a green light, and when you press it, the green light goes away and it stays off for 15 minutes. So basically you don't like overdose yourself with epidural. So every 15 minutes, you're allowed to press the button and get basically like a re-up of epidural. I did not realize that that's how the epidural worked, but once I was like, okay, like I just gotta press the button when I'm in pain, I was pressing that shit like all the time. So I guess like Saturday night, I am still 5 centimeters dilated. I haven't progressed. And for some reason, I thought that the epidural was wearing off because again, I've heard so many horror stories about it wearing off, and I was like nervous that I had got the epidural too early, and I was already in labor for like a really long time at that point. So I was like, please call the anesthesiologist. Like I feel like I'm feeling everything. And he comes in to see if it's still working, and he takes a piece of ice and he like rubs it on my hand. He's like, oh, can you feel the coldness? I was like, yeah, I feel it. And then he rubs it on my leg and he's like, oh, do you feel the coldness? I'm like, no, like I didn't feel shit. He's like, well, the epidural is still working. So I was like, is there any way that we can like up this epidural? So they gave me, I don't remember what it was called. I think it was like called a bolus shot. Basically, it was kind of like a booster shot of epidural to like, I think, make it stronger. The doctor comes in and she checks me again. I'm like, please don't say 5 centimeters. And she's like, yeah, like you haven't progressed. We're gonna have to start to possibly consider a C-section because it's been about 24 hours and you're still like your cervix is not opening up any further. It's like, okay, like just do it, just do the C-section, please, just like get this over with. And my mom and Will were like, no, like hold off, like see if you dilate any further, like trust me, like, you don't want a C-section. But I was just so exhausted and tired and in pain and pressure. Like, I just wanted, like, to get everything over with. So the doctor's like, okay, we're gonna reassess everything in the morning at 7 a.m. because that's when the new shift of doctors and nurses came in. See how far you've dilated, but for now, just try to get some rest. And at some point in all this, they started giving me Pitocin. I don't know when they started giving me Pitocin. So they shut off the lights. My mom and Will fell asleep. I'm there, like, kind of resting, kind of closing my eyes. I kind of fall asleep, and I swear to you, when I fell asleep, I think the nurse went and, like, upped the Pitocin. So the Pitocin is basically like a volume lever, like you just do, 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 and it goes up and down. And I swear when I fell asleep, she turned that shit all the way up. So I woke up around probably like 3, 4 a.m. So this was basically Sunday morning at this point. And I was just moaning. I was just like, like in pain, like.
I'm perfectly fine, babe.
And my mom wakes up and I'm like, I can feel her. I can feel her. I can feel her head. Like, I need to push. Like, I just felt the urge to push. It's like, okay, just relax. Don't push. And I was like, no, like, I feel like she's going to fall out. Like, I feel like she's going to slip right out. And my mom was like, don't worry. She's not going to slip out. Let me go get the nurse. Mind you, Will's still sleeping. And I'm just there like, oh, like, she's coming. She's coming. Like, I literally, the best way I can describe it is I felt like I had to take the biggest shit of my life. Like, I felt her head there. Like, it was like, I felt like it was right there. Like, I legit felt like I had to push and she was just gonna come right out. So the doctor comes in, she checks me and she's like, yep, you're about 8 or 9 centimeters dilated, so we can get ready to start pushing now. And I was like, shit, like, so this is when everything kind of starts to become a blur. So I'm like, Will, get up. Like, he's literally still sleeping at this point. I'm like, I'm 9 centimeters, I have to push, get up. So we wake him up, they turn on all the lights. It literally, like, it feels like I'm in a different world at this point. Like, a bunch of doctors come in, pediatricians come in for the baby once the baby is out. It just was like a whole different room. The bed that I was in, they put the 2 things up for me to, like, put my feet. They brought in, like, all the tools. Like, it just was like everything was just happening really fast. And I was like, I feel like I have to push. I feel like I have to push. And they're like, okay, hold on. Like, she's not gonna come out that easy. You know, her head is right there. I can see her hair. I was like, oh my God. Then I started pushing. I'll insert some pictures, and I pushed probably for about 45 minutes, and then Luna was here. So this is when shit started to go left. So I pushed her out, they put her on my chest, I'm crying, I'm exhausted, I'm sweating.
She's a relaxed baby.
Hi, Boo-Boo. She's happy. We're gonna clean her up soon. She'll be all pretty.
I'm like trying to look at her. I'm like, who does she look like? And she's like laying there on my chest, and they're like, okay, you have to deliver the placenta, give us a little push. So I literally gave like the littlest, like weakest push. And I deliver the placenta, and, you know, the baby's fine. You know, all the doctors, everything clears out. And then they take the baby off me, they go to weigh her, and I kind of like sit up a little bit, or they kind of like lifted the bed up. And I was like, oh shit, like I don't feel good. At this point, there was only my nurse left in the room. And I was like, I don't feel good. I don't feel good. And she's like, well, what's wrong? And I was like, I can't see straight. Like, I literally was seeing double. My vision was blurred. Like, I just kept saying, I can't see straight. I can't see straight. I don't feel good. It's like, okay, we're going to take you to the recovery room. So Will and the baby come with me to the recovery room. My mom couldn't come because the recovery room is kind of similar to the triage. It's like an open space that's like divided by curtains. So a lot of people don't really fit there. So only one person was allowed with me, and the baby came in like those plastic bassinets that they roll around the hospital. And one of the doctors comes in and he's like, yeah, the reason you're not feeling good and the blurred vision and everything is because you lost a lot of blood. So during labor, like, you're expected to lose a certain amount of blood. I don't know exactly how much it is, But the doctor basically described it to me as a 2-liter Pepsi bottle. He's like, do you know those 2-liter Pepsi bottles? You lost about half of that. And that's not normal. Like, that's a lot more blood than you should have lost. And he's like, we're gonna have to give you a blood transfusion. That's the only thing that was pretty much gonna like bring me back to life. And then I looked at Will and I was like, oh my God, like, what do I do? Because they kind of gave me the option, like, oh, do you want a blood transfusion? And I'm like, well, like, yeah, like, what option do I have? If I lost a lot of blood, like, obviously, yeah, I need more blood. So I got a blood transfusion. I had to sign off. You know, they had to match up my blood type. And at that point, the baby was next to me in the recovery room, but I couldn't even like sit up. I couldn't even like lift her. I could barely like keep my eyes open. And I was like, well, how are we gonna feed the baby? Like, I need to start to breastfeed. And like, I was just like thinking a million different things at once. And they were like, okay, like, if you want, we can take the baby to the nursery. Obviously, I was not well enough to try to start breastfeeding. I had no idea how to breastfeed. I wasn't even well enough to care for the baby. So they were like, okay, like, if you want, we can take her to the nursery. We'll take care of her there until you're better, basically. And I was like, yeah, like, I literally can't care for her. So they took the baby to the nursery. It was just me and Will in the recovery room. And they were like, okay, you're gonna have to stay here for 24 hours, which, mind you, that's not a normal amount of time to have to stay in the recovery room. So in the 24 hours that I was there was other women coming in and out, and they stayed maybe for like 2 hours, 3, 4 hours. I had to be there for a full 24 hours, which shows you pretty much how bad it was. They bring in the blood, which was like the weirdest thing. It's like in this little pouch. They basically like hook it up to your IV. And he was like, okay, like, we're gonna start it. And I was like, oh, like, I was just so out of it. I was like, okay, like, can I go to sleep? And he was like, yeah, you can go to sleep. Like, you're not gonna feel anything. It's not gonna hurt. And I just remember like seeing the pouch there. It's going in through the IV, and I see it go into the IV in my hand, and I kind of just like knocked out. So I wake up, the blood transfusion, it's all done. And I'm still feeling like very woozy. I still can't see straight. I'm still dizzy. And the doctor comes in and he's like, oh, how are you feeling? And I'm like, I'm still not good. Like, I still feel like shit. And he's like, okay, like, we're gonna draw your blood to see where your levels are and see how you're doing. They take my blood. The doctor comes back a little bit later and he's like, okay, like, your levels are still pretty low. We're gonna suggest a second blood transfusion. It's like, oh my God, a second one, which it didn't like make a difference to me. It's not like I had to do anything. I literally just had to like lay there and get blood, but it just sounded so bad to hear like, okay, like, you're still not doing well. I still wasn't feeling good. Like, just to hear the words, we're gonna have to give you a second blood transfusion, was like scary. So Will was there with me the entire time, but your support person was only allowed to be with you in the recovery room until like 10 or 11 o'clock. So he had to leave. I was there by myself overnight. I think I was by myself. He was definitely there when I got the first blood transfusion. I think when I got the second one, he was already like leaving. So I'm there by myself. Again, I hear a bunch of women coming in and out and in and out. And in the morning, they're asking me, oh, how are you feeling? I am feeling better at that point. And they're like, okay, we're gonna take you to your postpartum room. We're gonna bring the baby there. So finally, I was able to leave the recovery room, finally, after 24 hours. I wanted to see my baby. Like, I was away from her for a really long time. The only time that I really had to like hold her was when she first came out and they first put her on my chest. But pretty much all day Sunday, like, I wasn't with her. They helped me walk from the bed I was on to the wheelchair. And in my mind, like, I don't know why I thought like I was just gonna get up and be okay. And they were like, oh, like, can you make it to the wheelchair? I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, Will compares it to like spaghetti legs. I was just like that. Like, I could not walk. So they help me into the wheelchair. They wheel me from the recovery room to my postpartum room, which is kind of like your hotel room pretty much in the hospital. And then from there, they help me from the wheelchair to the bed in the postpartum room. And they finally bring the baby to me, and I was still fucked up. I couldn't walk. Will wasn't there yet. He was on his way, and like finally, like I was like, oh my God, like my baby's here. Like, what do I do now? Like, what do I do with her? That was pretty much it in terms of me. So we were in the postpartum room after that. Will came. We're now trying to figure out how to take care of a baby. I'm trying to figure out how to breastfeed. We're trying to figure out all these things. I felt better. I didn't feel like dizzy anymore. Like one of the doctors comes into the postpartum room and she's like, okay, how are you feeling? And I was like, I feel better. Like I still feel a little bit dizzy, but I feel better than I did before. And she's like, okay, like we're gonna continue to check on your blood levels, and if they still aren't looking good, we might have to give you a third blood transfusion. And I was like, oh my God, like another one? Like, again, it's nothing to me. Like, it doesn't hurt me, or like, I don't have to do anything. It's just the thought of like, damn, like I'm really that fucked up that I might need a third blood transfusion. So I was just trying to get as much rest as I could. I was, you know, trying to drink water, eating, you know, the meals that they gave me. I was like, I just want to be better so I can leave this hospital. I don't want to have to spend another day here getting a blood transfusion. Like, I just want to go home with my baby. So on Tuesdays, when they were reassessing everything to see if I needed to have a third blood transfusion, if I did, we obviously had to stay in the hospital longer. So they were just checking my levels to see if a third one would be necessary. And finally, they were like, okay, your levels are good. They were giving me blood pressure medication. They were like, okay, we're gonna prescribe you blood pressure medication. You have to take that every day, you know, once you leave the hospital. And I was good. I was cleared. I was good to go. Then we find out that the baby has jaundice, which was like another ordeal. So basically, we were in the room sleeping. The baby was actually sleeping at that point. And another side note, which I didn't know, so in your postpartum room, doctors and nurses come in and out at all times of the day, all times of the night. They don't even knock on the door. You could be butt-ass naked, you could be in the shower, you could be sleeping, and they just burst into your room at any time. So me, Will, and the baby were all sleeping. It was like 4 a.m. and a pediatrician walks in. So there's nurses, there's doctors that are there for you, for the woman that gave birth, and then there's pediatricians that come in to check on the baby. So the pediatrician comes in at, no lie, like 4 a.m. We're half asleep. We're like what now? Like, so she's explaining to us that the baby's levels were high for, so she didn't say the word jaundice. She said like the medical technical term for it, which was hyperbilirubin or something like that. So she's like, Luna's levels are high. You know, this could be very dangerous. This could lead to brain damage, which, mind you, we had just went through all of that I talked about. It was 4 in the morning. We were half asleep, and she comes in saying that our baby has something that could possibly lead to brain damage. Like, you know, in order to treat the hyper blah, 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 we have to put Luna under the lights. You know, is that what you want to do? And again, it's 4 in the morning. We've never heard this term before. We don't know what's going on. This was just like thrown at us. And we're just like, okay, like what choice do we have? Like, obviously we need her to get better. And she's like, you know, you can choose not to do it, but then, you know, her levels are going to stay high, and then it could cause this and that. So we were like, okay, like, you know, obviously we have to say yes to this. So they take the baby at around 4:30 in the morning, and I just start crying, because I don't fully understand and grasp what's going on. I'm tired, I'm not feeling well, and it just was like so many things happening at once. So one of the nurses comes in, and I'm like crying there with Will, And she's like, yeah, like honestly, like this is something that's really common. Jaundice is really common in babies. And we're like explaining to the nurse, which mind you, the nurse was like young. She was like our age. She was mad cool. And we were like, yeah, like they said it was like, it could lead to brain damage and this and that. And she's like, well, like they have to say that, like they have to give the worst case scenario. But jaundice is really common. Like she's just gonna have to be under the lights for about 6 hours, and after that her level should go down and she should be fine. So I'll insert a picture of Luna under the lights. It was just sad, and it was like kind of scary to see your baby like that. Like they put like these goggle things on her, and she was naked, and it just looked like she was in pain, and or she was like hurting, but she literally was knocked out like in those glasses under the light. So the place, like the nursery thing that they have them under the lights, it was literally right outside our room. So we would like leave our room, we would go like look and check on her, and we would come back. So they did that procedure for about 6 hours, and the pediatrician's like, okay, like, you know, after 6 hours, after she's under the light for 6 hours, we'll bring her back to the room with you guys, and then we'll reassess. We'll have to take her blood to see if her levels have gone down enough. And if they have gone down enough, then you guys can go home. But if not, then we'll have to put her under the light for another 6 hours. So after being under the light for 6 hours, they took her blood. The level had gone down, so she was better. She was cleared to go. And we finally went home. I remember we went home on September 1st. And that was pretty much everything. That was my birth story. It was nothing what I expected it to be. So she was born on August 29th at 5:49 a.m. She was 6 pounds, 4 ounces, 16.5 inches long. So I gave birth exactly on the day that I hit 37 weeks. So she was considered, so it was considered a full-term pregnancy. She wasn't considered a preemie. And everything was just such a shock because my pregnancy was so good. It was so smooth, no complications, nothing, which also was kind of surprising to me because I thought I was gonna be sick. I thought I was gonna have morning sickness. Like I thought pregnancy was gonna be miserable, just like everybody said. And I literally had the best pregnancy that like anyone could ask for. My pregnancy was so good. I was like, oh, I could have another baby in like less than a year. Definitely not saying that anymore. Just the pregnancy was so good, and then the delivery just like completely took a turn. Hi, Mama. You woke up? Why you give me the side eye? Oh, Mama, you be in the video? How would you don't have to be in it, you can just talk. How would you describe the birth and the labor?
Overwhelming. Not what we expected.
Yep.
Very stressful. And scary. Very scary.
Yep.
For the both of you.
Both of me and her? What about you?
Well, scary in the sense of anything could happen to any of you.
Yeah.
Be fatal for
Both.
the baby or for you.
Yeah. And now here she is. 13 pounds, 5 months later. Why, Mama?
So who does she look like?
No, now she's not looking.
Look over here.
Look. What does she look like? Yes, we know. Everybody's gonna say she looks like you. Yes, she looks mostly like you. All of that I went through to come out looking like him.
No, we all know she looks like me, so
I know.
I'll
Okay.
just put it
I'll see you later. No, that's pretty much it for this video. Comment down below what you're looking at. Let me know what you would like to see next, and I will see you guys in the next video.